Hello, this is Bob Thompson of Customer Think, and welcome to the MaritzCX webinar on how to evolve your customer experience maturity. Today we'll learn about a practical framework called CXEvolution that encompasses a maturity model, a series of assessments, and a set of solutions that will take your organization to the next level of CX maturity. Leading off today, calling in from Arkansas will be Dave Fish, Senior VP for the Expert Services Group globally. He has over 20 years of experience in numerous verticals on both the client and the supplier side, and he's going to share some thoughts on the state of the CX industry, as well as reveal this CXEvolution model. Next, you'll hear from Matt Inman, who's speaking to us today from Sydney, Australia. He is Senior Director of CX Strategy and Design. And Matt's going to talk about the CX assessment offerings based on the model, the CXEvolution model. He's responsible for applying best practices from industry-leading CX programs and for leading the development of thought leadership strategies for MaritzCX. And finally, for the big finish, we'll hear from Michael Allenson from San Francisco, who's going to show you how to connect the dots from CX maturity to increasing business outcomes that we all care about, like improving financial performance and increasing customer loyalty. He is a Senior Strategic Consulting Director with MaritzCX with over 25 years of experience consulting with companies on strategic marketing, customer experience, and consumer behavior. Now, if you have questions during this program, you can ask them anytime by typing in the box below the presentation area. We'll answer questions at the conclusion of our program. And be sure to use the full screen button in the upper right to enlarge your screen if you need to see a detailed slide more clearly, and we'll have a few of those that you may want to use that feature. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Dave Fish to begin. Take it away, Dave.
Thanks, Bob, and welcome to today's presentation. Appreciate everyone stopping in. Yeah, as Bob mentioned, we're really excited about this new approach to customer experience. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, when Mr. Power was knocking on the doors of Toyota Industrial Equipment with his surveys, we were busy at work deploying surveys for General Motors and other large organizations around customer experience. So we have a long history now as MaritzCX of doing this work. And since we were in the inception area of this, we feel it's probably now time to turn the page and go to what's next in customer experience. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So let's just begin with a little bit of background in terms of what the industry is looking like nowadays. So in 2014, it's predicted we spent about $3.7 billion on customer experience, according to Market & Markets consulting firm. That's projected to move up to $8.4 billion. So that's a pretty big increase. Major organizations such as Walmart, General Motors, and others are really those industries or those companies who traditionally may have a different focus are really now focusing on a customer experience as a major strategic objective. So meanwhile, we have about 9.4 million people somehow connected to customer experience. So we're able to query LinkedIn members, and we found about 9.4 million had customer experience somewhere in their profile. So to give you an idea of scale, if we kicked every man, woman, and child out of their homes in New York City and we wanted to have a conference there, we'd still need about 1 million homes to house people for that event. So a lot of people are involved. So we have a lot of money being spent, a lot of people involved in this activity. But unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot to show for it. So this is from the American Customer Satisfaction Index, ASCI. This is their index. And you can see when it started in 1995, quarter three, we're about 73.7 as a nation. Dipped to 73.2 in 05, and then rebounded to 73.8. So not a whole lot of progress to show as an industry. Now, within here, I know there's companies that have bolted ahead, but there has to be just as many companies that had lagged behind in industries in general. So the take-home point here is we probably could do a little better than flat over the period of 20 years. And this is not only just what the consumers are saying. In our study, we found about 72% of CX practitioners said, we're just not getting as much as we'd like out of our program. It's really not driving the business outcomes. So, what do we do about this? And what have we tried to do? Well, over time, we've had a veritable alphabet soup of acronyms, SSI, NPS, customer effort, and so forth. And those are good things. They get organizations very focused in on the customer, but haven't produced results we might have hoped. Also, we've stack ranked organizations every which way to Friday. That, again, is not necessarily a bad thing at all. It gets the organization focused in on winning, on doing well. The only problem is that focus tends to be fleeting. And so we have the syndicated results come out once, twice a year, and there's a flurry of activity, but that doesn't really have that durability all the time for organizations to get behind and really make sure there's a constant focus on customer experience and actually doing something about it. And then finally, in the last decade or so, technology has played a huge role in the customer experience space. And MaritzCX, when we merged with Allegiance, are part of that. So we were able to provide faster, cheaper, better information when people need it. But technology by itself is a means to an end, not an end in and of itself. And so what's going on here? Well, we decided to take a step back and kind of try to get a little bit of perspective here. If you think about customer experience, it involves two partners, two roles. On one side, we have the customer, and on the other side, we have the organizations that are providing those services. And, we spent a lot of time focusing on the customer, and rightly so. We've understood expectations, what they want, what they don't want. We've done a fairly good job of doing that, but we probably haven't done as good a job at looking at the organization and what is the organization doing to increase the customer experience, to increase the customer experience for their customers. And that's what we call CXEvolution. And what CXEvolution is all about is really holding a mirror up to your organization and understanding where you're at today and where you need to go tomorrow in order to impact the customer experience and those downstream business outcomes that everyone is chasing. So how does it work? So the CXEvolution framework, what we do is we first assess your organization and what you're doing in terms of effort. We then place you on a maturity curve, and so you know where you're at. And then from there, we help you evolve. We help recommend different things that you could do, both services that we provide and others provide, to get you to that next step. And that's what we're going to kind of walk you through in more detail today. So my part of this presentation is to provide some of the detail of what's underneath the hood. How does this thing work? Why is it different? Why is it better than some of the other things that are out there? And ultimately, how can it improve your organization to really get the outcomes, the business outcomes that everyone's chasing after? So we started off with a model that consists of 6 different components, and it's based loosely on, inspired by the work of Jay Galbraith and Fred Lelou. And we took this model and we modified it a bit and poured our experience into doing this for the last 20 or some years, and then we actually tested the model out. So underlying the model are 6 different components. On the outside, we have things like customer, how do you respond to customers? And if you think about your own organization, these are questions you might want to ask yourself. So are you responding to your customers or reacting to them, or are you trying to anticipate needs? Organizational structure is not something you always think about when it comes to customer experience, but increasingly you hear these words of our organization is siloed and there's not a seamless experience for the customer. Structure has a direct impact on how you please the customer, how you deal with the customer. And so you might ask yourself, are we really set up in such a way to really deliver value to customers? Processes, customer-facing processes specifically, are we consistent in those processes? Are they based on the customer journey? Are they documented? Does everyone know what those processes are? Those are really important things to think about in terms of driving a customer-centric culture and getting those outcomes. Information, and this is an area that we spend probably a lot of time on, maybe too much time, but still, do we have the right sources? Are they integrated in the right way? Are they accurate? Are we talking to the right people at the right time about the right stuff? So that's an important baseline. And finally, well, almost finally, is people. And again, this is something you always think about, is how do we select the right people? How do we train them? How do we inspire them to do great things for the customer? Because ultimately, we're in the customer business. And then supporting that right in the middle is culture. And so if you don't have a culture that believes in the relationship between treating customers well and those business outcomes and believing that's the right thing to do, it's a non-starter. So you really have to have that commitment and core belief, especially with senior management and the founders, about the importance of customer. And they interact with one another, as you can see there. So we took those concepts and we poured it in, and we modeled it out into 8 specific stages we call customer evolution stages. So these are different maturity stages. And you can see there, and Michael's going to talk a bit about this, but we've modeled it into a direct positive relationship with business outcomes. So this is a validated model. It's not just theory, and it actually drives business outcomes. So these stages start with apathetic. So these are folks who are not, the organizations in this stage are people who are not necessarily horrible at customer experience. It's just not a priority. They might be focused on innovation or market share or something else. They're just not in it yet. And a lot of smaller companies fit into this area. Investigate is the next stage up. And these organizations are putting their toes in the water for the first time around customer experience. And this is really a dangerous stage because it's sort of half measures. And when we have half measures, we know that tends to disappoint customers. You come to have an expectation, even if it's an expectation of bad service, at least it's consistent. And so organizations in this area, we really advocate them get out as quickly as possible. It's better to do nothing than to do half measures. Measure is the first sort of leap in the customer experience. Organizations in this phase really are getting started with measurement. And they're just kind of looking at their customers and trying to understand what expectations are. So they're not doing much intervention yet. They're just kind of taking it all in. And it's a good place to start. It's the first step. Respond is the next level up, and this is where we're taking information, and we're not only reaching out to folks who said, hey, I have a problem, but we're being a little more proactive, and we're talking to folks who have problems more proactively, and I'm trying to uncover those things and doing service recovery in a very responsive way. Standardize is where a lot of our clients and most companies sort of plateau out, and this is where we start to understand behavioral expectations and have standardized responses to customers. So you'll pick up in so many rings, be greeted in so many minutes, things of that nature. Here, training comes into play. We start hiring people on KS knowledge, skills, and abilities. And they really start getting to customer experience in a very formalized way. The next huge leap is to solve. And solve is just what organizations can solve, just what it sounds like. Now they're using multiple data sources to solve complex problems. They're driving more of the discretion down to the line employee. And so this is a big step because it's a very big change in the organizational culture. So now you're probably hiring a different kind of person, not just based on knowledge, skills, and abilities, but on their innate ability to deal with customers. And we could probably all think of organizations that would fit there. Align is the next one up, and now we're getting some rarefied air, and this is where we're aligning around the customer journey. And so we're breaking down those silos almost completely. And then finally, enculturate is sort of the pinnacle. This is where it's really in the fabric, the DNA of the organization's culture to do the right thing by the customer. And I might add, solve through and enculturate is where we start to kind of pull back from incentive systems, from tracking NPS and so forth in a sort of incentivized fashion, because people know that doing the right thing by the customer is good for business. Let's move forward and see how these different stages correspond with those underlying processes, information, customer, people. So across each one of these stages has those underlying dimensions, and within those dimensions, there's some specific competencies. Now, this is a little bit of an eye chart. I'm not going to go into it. But the point here is this is a very, very transparent model that you can understand exactly where you're at today, why you're there, and what you need to do to get to the next level. And so there's no black box. It's just very straightforward. And like I said, it's really holding the mirror up to your organization And one of the interesting things about this is when you hold that mirror up, sometimes people have different opinions on where you're at. So the first step is really getting alignment around where you are as an organization. Just in general, the CXEvolution model, it's holistic, so we're not just looking at information or customer response as some of the other models might do out there. It's really looking at it as an entirety. We have a scientific foundation based on organizational theory and tested with an empirical study and validated. It's transparent and easy to understand, no black box, and really promotes alignment and accountability. So many times as a supplier or a partner to companies, they come to us and say, hey, we didn't improve year over year. Well, some of that is having the organization needs to actually engage in some activities to make that needle move forward. So it really ensures accountability on both the vendor or supplier or partner side as well as the client side to work together as a partner to move things forward and to understand why if things didn't move forward, what happened or didn't happen. We also have global industry benchmarks with Matt, which Matt's going to talk about quite a bit as well. And so you'll be able to see where your organization fits within your industry or even in different countries, in different areas of the world. We offer a prescriptive path forward, and Michael's going to bring us home with really taking a look at how does this actually directly connect to outcomes. So in other words, as I move up that maturity curve, what am I going to get? What's in it for me? So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Inman, and he's going to talk a bit about what this is all about in a bit more detail. Matt?
Thanks, Dave. So Dave did a nice job of really kind of laying the foundation, showing really how customer experience is becoming a really large area of focus in the marketplace, but has also kind of set the backdrop that most organizations that are getting involved in this, they're really just not having the success that they're looking for. In the former life that I led prior to being in this role, I worked with a lot of the same challenges when I designed and led a customer experience program for our organization as well. And during that time, I also ran across a lot of maturity models. And like anybody who's running these functions, every time they would come out, you would always want to take them, kind of get a sense of, hey, where's my organization? And when you go across them, you run across a lot of the facets of the models that are kind of intuitive, they make sense. But you also run across a lot where it's very high level and it's a little theoretical in nature. So when we started out to build this, one of the things that we really wanted to make sure that we were doing is we were building something that wasn't going to be just another theoretical model that you could take in there, but it was actually something that was going to give you some tangible results that would come back and give you a good guidance and help you establish a roadmap of, okay, great, I know where I am, but where do I go next? So what I'd like to do is take you through the offerings that we have here and really try to make this tangible with the understanding of, hey, so if I get involved in this, what am I going to get from you guys when it comes to this? So when we look at the CX assessment, we've got 3 different offerings that we created, and we did this for different levels of curiosity, your need, your capabilities, and maybe budgetary resources that you have available to yourself. And as I go through these, I want you to get a sense of what you get, but also kind of give a little bit of a thought to, well, where's my organization on the continuum with this? So let me start off by showing you the self-assessment. The self-assessment is a free assessment that we offer to everyone. And when we get to the end of the presentation, Michael's going to share a link with you where you can go in and take this assessment yourself. The way the self-assessment is set up is you go in on an individual basis. You fill out all the questions that are related to the different levels that Dave had shared with you from Jay Galbraith's model and getting into the processes and information and things like that. And it'll give you an immediate sense of where does your organization lie based off of your individual inputs into this. And as you go in, it's just going to be a series of 14 questions, takes a few minutes to take, and really has a focus on the processes, the information, the culture, the people, the structure, and everything else that Dave has already mentioned here as well. So once you go through and you take the assessment, what do you get out of it? Well, immediately the first thing you're going to see is you're going to see a screen pop up that's going to tell you immediately, okay, well, based off of all the different levels of maturity that Dave had referenced, where does my organization fit based off of my perspective of things? Then off to the right, you're going to get this benchmark comparison. It's going to show what your organization looks like, as shown in the green here. And then it's going to give you a comparison relative to the global benchmark that we've seen here in our study, and also those organizations that are considered CX leaders. And CX leaders is defined as the organizations that fit in those top 2 levels of maturity, align and enculturate that David shared with us earlier. Now, if you want a little bit more detail, there's an option here for you to be able to click on the PDF option, And what that does is it kicks out a 4-page report that goes into a little bit more detail. Again, it's going to share with you the level of maturity that your organization is at right now. It's going to show you a benchmark of where your organization is relative to the global average and CX leaders. But then it's going to go into a little bit of a description of, okay, well, if I'm in this measure stage, what does that mean to me? Give me a description of what that is. And then it's going to give you a little bit of a, what are the keys for my organization to be able to move forward? After that, it starts to give you a little bit more detailed description of what each one of those different dimensions are and what your benchmark is on there. And then it finishes off to the far right with kind of the money slide that Michael's going to be going into a little bit later. So that's everything that's included in the free assessment, and I highly encourage everyone to just go in and take it after we finish up with the webinar or when we send out some materials later on is just a way to be able to kind of test the tires a little bit yourself. So the next level is the diagnostic offering, and this is where I'm going to spend a little bit more time because this is where you start to get into something that is a lot more comprehensive in measuring your organization's current state, but even more importantly, it's a lot more detailed in identifying your organization's top priorities for improvement. And the diagnostic offering that we put together is a service that we offer for $10,000. So what's involved in the diagnostic offering? Well, the diagnostic offering is going to be similar to what we see from the initial diagnostic, where you get an assessment of how your organization is doing based off of the 14 different dimensions of maturity. But what this also does is it takes the 14 dimensions of maturity and it also breaks it down into other facets that fit within there. So strategic focus and alignment, your VOC program, the role of your executive leadership, structure and governance, and everything else that's listed here. And it goes into 80 different questions that get down into very low levels of detail that give you those very structured pieces of information that you need to be able to understand what does my organization need to do to be able to move forward, and how do I look relative to others within my industry, within the global benchmark, and those who are considered customer experience leaders. In all of the items that we look in here, we also cross against a lot of different performance metrics, looking at the business results, impact on satisfaction, retention, and employee satisfaction, with the intent being that anything that we measure, we want you to know the kind of impact that this has for your organization. So we don't just have things in here so you can kind of get a sense of, well, how do I look on this measure? We also want you to know that there's kind of a, why should I even care about this measure to begin with? And I'll show you a little bit of an illustration of that in just a moment when we get to some of the detailed report slides. So if you go in and you actually take the assessment for your organization, what do you get? Well, the first thing we do as an organization is you want your entire organization, or at least as broad of a sample of your organization to take this as possible. So instead of it being just an individual response, you want to be able to get a sense from people that are on your front lines and your retail locations, your care centers, as well as your support functions. So people that are in IT, people that might be in your legal or your HR functions as well, because you want to get a good dynamic sense of what does the organizational assessment for your customer experience readiness look like. And included in the report, you're going to get slides like this where it's going to give you a sense of, well, globally, how many of the companies, the organizations that we looked at fall within the apathetic, investigate, mature, et cetera, kind of stages as well. So you can kind of get that benchmark reference of where your organization lies relative to the distribution of other organizations. We'll also give you a lot of slides that look for some of the insights that we've identified at a global level. What are the things that drive satisfaction, or what are the things that drive the results for your organization? Kind of starts to get into that dialogue of where should we focus our efforts on first. In addition to that, then, we get into individual slides that will give you a sense or a diagnostic view of, hey, for every one of those 80 questions that we're asking that are giving me this comprehensive understanding of how my organization performs, well, what does that look like? And this slide here is a good illustration of one of those outputs that you get. So in this case, we're looking at processes specific to the application of the customer-related processes. And it'll give you a good description of what that means. It'll give you a summary that's specific to your organization, how your organization performed. It'll also give you what's called the business impact, or kind of the why should I care about this variable. And that's the graph that's on the top there. For each one of the variables that we look at here, we're looking at, hey, based off of their individual responses, what was the business impact, or what was the return on the financial performance for that organization based off of each one of the types of responses that you have. So it kind of gives you that sense of, why should I care about this variable to begin with? After you've gone through that, you kind of moved on the slide, and you'll see that middle graph there, which will give you kind of this index sense of, well, how did my organization respond to this? what was the average for my industry or sector. So if I was a bank, it would give me the average for all financial services sector, or if I was an automotive, it would give me the average for the automotive sector. Below then that, it'll give you the global benchmark average, and at the very end then it also gives you the, hey, for those organizations that are considered customer experience leaders, the ones that are really seeing that financial return for their focus on the customer, what are they doing? What kind of responses are they giving for these types of measures? And then when you go all the way down to the bottom, it'll give you the percentage of respondents within each one of these levels that gave you the response to every one of the options within the question itself shown above. So let me give you another illustration here. This is one where you've got 5 different questions that are illustrated on the same slide. And this one is specific to the information, and it gets down to the specifics on your VOC program itself. So in here, what we tried to identify was for some of these specific measures, in this case, it's looking at, you know, the percentage of the people that said, you know what, I got access to the VOC information in my organization, or I got access to this stuff in a digital dashboard that gives me the results that I need that are specific to my function. So in this case, what we tried to illustrate on the very top was, hey, for the organizations that are saying, you know what, that's not something that I have access to, what was their business results? And you can see here that their business results were not very strong. As you move over to the right, for the organizations that say, yeah, you know, we've got that digital dashboard and I have access to it, what was the impact on business results there? And it shows that they have very strong business results. So again, it's kind of the, hey, why should I care about having these things? And then as you move down below, it gives you that illustration benchmark again. So you kind of get a sense of, okay, well, where's my organization relative to others within my sector, or relative to those who are kind of best in the industry at this sort of thing? Are we doing pretty well, or is this something that we have a lagging effect relative to everyone else? And let me show you one last slide as an illustration of what you would get. Here again, we're looking at VOC program again. This is just dummy data at the point, but the sense of this is trying to give you a sense of, hey, for all these different ways that I could be collecting and measuring impact on our VOC program, what are the ones that have the greatest impact on here? And then on the bottom, as you start to look at it, it gives you a sense of, well, how's my organization doing relative to everyone else? And the thing that's kind of relatively important about this is, if I'm a CX director, or I'm somebody who's in charge of the VOC efforts for my organization, it's a great way for me not to only identify, hey, what are the ways that really give me the greatest return for my efforts or my investment on this stuff as it relates to giving an impact on the business, but then it also gives me the ammunition to be able to say, wow, the items that really have a great impact are areas that when I start to benchmark myself against the industry best, or even those within my sector, you know, we tend to be behind. And what's nice about that then is when you start having resource conversations, it gives you the ammunition for those conversations to be able to go in and say, look, I know that this has a great impact because we've seen some industry benchmarks, but I also know we're not where the rest of the industry is right now. So this is an area where we need to focus a little bit more. So the next step is you go through all that stuff. It's like, hey, great, love all the detail that I'm getting here, but 80-some variables, that's a lot to digest. Where do I begin with all this sort of thing? So what we have included in the report is an algorithm that kind of gives you the sense of, hey, what are my top 10? Based off of those that have the greatest impact on my overall business results and those where I've got the greatest gap to the rest of the industry, where should I begin? And the algorithm will pop out your top 10 that'll give you, hey, if you want to have the greatest impact on your customer experience functions that will translate into your business results, this is where you should focus. And not only gives you the top 10, but we'll go in and then we'll identify, hey, based off of what your top 10 are, this is what we would consider your recommended next step. This is the next thing that you should really focus on and put into your roadmap for your organization. So the intent here is not just to give you a lot of interesting results that you look at and say, that's pretty cool, but also to say, okay, so as I'm planning out my roadmap for the upcoming year, what should I have in that roadmap for us to be able to move forward and see the success that we're looking for? And then finally is the last level of the assessment that we look at, which is the prescriptive. And this is a much more of a consultative approach. It's a $50,000 engagement where essentially what we're doing is we're doing a very detailed and kind of customized consultation event for your organization. And what you get with that is you get everything that we already showed you within the CX assessment, the diagnostic version. You're going to get all of those variables where you're going to get a sense of the business impact from each one of those average, and as well as the customer experience leaders. But then in addition to that, we also come in and we do a series of stakeholder interviews, trying to identify within your organization where there are opportunities for improvement, We'll come up with a customized report that'll get down to a much more granular level of detail that might get down into everything from the way that you're conducting your sampling to the individual aspect as it relates back to the alignment between your branding and your mission, vision, all that sort of stuff. We'll create a customized multi-year roadmap that'll get down again into very granular levels of detail and recommendations. We'll do customer review sessions that get down into the look at your research reports, the breadth, the depth of your analysis, the breadth of the reporting that goes out, and all the other items that are listed here. And then we'll come up with a prioritized list of improvement opportunities for your organization. And frequently when we do this, we're able to generate a really good audience for the report out of this so that everybody kind of feels aligned with where does the organization need to go with its customer experience efforts so that you can move forward. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Michael, and Michael is going to take us home, and he's going to give us a little bit of that. This is kind of cool, but why should we care about this to begin with? What is the impact for my organization, and why should this be something that you guys have on your customer experience roadmap for the future? Michael?
Thank you, Matt. And as both Matt and Dave alluded, we've evolved in this business, and it's really more than just about the customer experience and the improvements we make, but it's the impact that we have on the business, and that's never more true than it is today. So what I'm going to talk to you here in this last section about is why should we care, what is different today, and why is it important to take different action today, and what do we have to do? What do we have to do differently? Because something needs to change. So Dave talked about some of the changes that are happening in the industry, some of the trends. Maybe the most important one is represented by this number 89%. And it is a very big number. And what does it represent? Well, it represents the number of companies, according to recent research by Gartner, that are expecting that by this year, 2016, that they will be differentiating themselves mostly, and I repeat mostly because that is really important, on the basis of customer experience. So this means that no longer is CX just a function of a CX group or an operations group that's trying to manage a channel, or a research group that's trying to understand the customer experience from that standpoint. This is now a clear strategic initiative of most corporations, and that means the C-suite is paying attention. And so the question for most of us who are in the business of measuring, monitoring, and improving the customer experience is, are you ready? Are you ready for that strategic conversation and the plans that you need to create that the CEO is going to be looking for? So if you think about it, we're sort of left with two very important questions. Dave showed you some data from ACSI that shows virtually no progress on average in terms of the average customer satisfaction that we're seeing across different organizations and industries. So, we're left with the questions of why and how. Why are our scores where they are today? Why are they not moving? And how do we move ahead? So, we've got a lot of measures that we've put in place that we've heard are the ones that are going to help us really understand this. But it hasn't necessarily moved the needle the way we want to. So we need something more that is really going to help us do that. So recently, when we did some earlier webinars where we talked about what we were learning from the benchmark research that underlied the CXEvolution framework. And we asked the question, which of the following is going to make the biggest difference in driving CX success? And this was among CX professionals. Is it having a robust, effective closed-loop process? Is it having the right tool in place to get your CX feedback to frontline employees? Is it having the right outcome metric that tells management how we're progressing as an organization? Or is it having leadership that sets the right tone, right expectations, leads by example? In other words, walking the walk. And interestingly, when we did this question in our webinars, Having leadership that sets the right tone, walks the walk, was number one, and it wasn't close. It was 75% of the responses that we got from CX professionals. And what does this tell us? If you think about it, the first 3 items on that list are all items that the CX Pro controls for the most part. They know what to do with those things, and they're doing many of them. They don't control leadership. So what it tells us is that to drive success with CX programs, improvement, all the things that we're trying to do as CX professionals, we need leadership and we need the organization to participate and be partners in our efforts. So as CX leaders, if you think about the things we just talked about, we need 3 things. We need a more strategic approach to CX improvement. We need to have leadership and an organization that is engaged and buys into what we're trying to accomplish and is true partners in the effort. And lastly, we need a roadmap. We need a roadmap that will help take us from where we are now to where we'd like to be, and that is much more clear and is actionable, and just we know what to do. So when we think about what Dave and Matt presented about CXEvolution, what does it give us? One of the things that it gives us is a different, more actionable form of benchmarking. If you think about most of the benchmarking that we do today, it is really focused on understanding things like NPS, overall SAT, other measures of how customers respond to the experience. And we sit and we talk about where we are and where competitors are, where the industry is, and how do we close that gap or widen the gap if we're leading. And oftentimes we don't really know what the answers are. The difference with CXEvolution is we're looking inward, as Dave talked about. It's not just looking at the customer, but looking inward. And what this allows us to do is have very, very clear steps of, hey, if we are talking about the way we respond to customers and our competitors are all doing predictive response to customers, being more proactive, and we're not, we know what that gap is, and it's much more clear what we need to do about it. The second thing that we get with CXEvolution and the results of this program is it allows us to sit down together as our providers of CX services with our client teams to be able to create a very clear roadmap of what we need to do and set goals and objectives and have a way to go and check whether we've achieved those goals and objectives. But even more so, what it allows us to do is have the same kind of conversations internally with our stakeholders and with others across the organization so that everybody understands what we're trying to achieve and what we need them to do in order to achieve it. So both Dave and Matt showed you some of these charts, and they alluded to the fact that we have validated this model against outcomes that companies have achieved. And we asked people in our benchmark study, which is a very large global benchmark of nearly 5,000 responses. We asked them, what happened in the past year to your financial performance and customer retention? Did it increase significantly or did it decline? Well, what we're representing here is the percentage of companies in each of these buckets that are telling us that they increased significantly their financial performance in the past year and or their retention. And as you can see, at the enculturate level, we get a much higher amount of improvement. In fact, they are 3 times as likely to have improved performance, financial performance and retention in the past year than not the bottom rung of our framework, our model, but the bottom half of our model. So you don't really start to be able to drive business outcomes with your CX programs until you get to the standardized level. And in fact, when we look at our benchmark, over almost 87% of the companies are in that bottom half. So there is a huge opportunity, and this explains in large measure why, as Dave was talking about, a lot of CX pros are not happy with the success that they've achieved. And so this model helps give a very clear roadmap of how you climb the ladder. So we don't just have a model. We've been putting it into practice already. And I've got a couple of examples for you. This is one that's a Fortune 200 global company, and they would have been more at the stage of about measure. And they came to us and they did the full prescriptive assessment. And what they were able to do is to, through the global stakeholder interviews and doing the service climate, all of those things, they were able to get a very clear plan of moving forward. This is a company that was very sales-driven, driven by acquisition of other companies, and they've reached a stage in their organization where they need to improve by driving organic growth, and they felt that they needed to be more customer-focused. So out of this process, they've gotten a transformation strategy that has a clear roadmap, as Matt talked about, a 3-year roadmap, and they're well on their way on taking action on that. They got their C-suite to back their effort and has put in additional resources and been more engaged and responsive to driving this solution. And ultimately, they've started looking at the account level to understand the impact on business outcomes and have started action at that level. And they've set themselves up so that they can begin to track the impact of customer experience on the business. And that is ultimately going to help them to drive engagement across the organization. Second, we worked with a Canadian OEM, or a Canadian division of a global automotive OEM. What they've been able to do is shift from being just focused on scores to actually being focused on driving action. And they've implemented an action planning process and process education so people would understand how to do action planning. They would be more in the situation of standardize and trying to move up to solve. And so what they've been able to do in just 1 year's time, shifting away from this focus on scores, which often has some negative byproducts, to having a 7 to 10% increase in loyalty metrics and overall SAT. They've got early signs that business impact is happening, and they're doing an analysis today where we're trying to help them understand the impact that it's having at the dealer level on sales. So ultimately, what do you get from CXEvolution? We're providing you with a success framework, so it helps you understand how you move up that ladder and how it turns into business outcomes. It's a clear roadmap to get there. And maybe most importantly, it helps you drive alignment and commitment within the organization, so it's not just us trying to move the needle on our own. So my question to you is, where do you think you sit in the maturity curve? If you want to learn about that, I'd invite you to take the free assessment that Matt talked about. You see the link right there. You can learn more about what we offer with CXEvolution through our brochure, our white paper. We have an infographic, a number of blogs that the team has written that you can find on our website and the CXEvolution webpage. So please feel free to contact us to learn more once you've done that or even before. And lastly, what I want to mention too is we have our CX Fusion conference that's coming up at the end of April. And what's really powerful about this conference this year is we are going to be weaving CXEvolution right into the conference. So you will see some main stage presentations on CXEvolution. You'll see some individual presentations along the way on CXEvolution, and lots of opportunities to discuss with your peers about where you are on the model and how you are working to move up that model. So with that, we'll turn it back to Bob and we'll open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. All right, we do have a few questions already, and I'd encourage everyone to take advantage of this time. We've got almost 15 minutes to answer your specific questions about CXEvolution and some of the concepts that our three speakers have talked about. I want to start and ask, well, let's start with Mr. Fish, and maybe you can comment on how long will it take to get results from each of these levels of CX assessment.
Sure, Bob. So level 1's easy. It's instantaneous. You go in, you fill it out, and it's kind of like a VOC quiz you take. Now, it's only your perspective on that, on your organization, but it gives you a feel for where you might be at as an organization. So that's instantaneous. You just go in, fill it out, you get your results. The second tier that Matt talked about, that is a report. It takes a little bit longer because we want to talk to your entire organization and about where you're at in terms of maturity, but also your service climate as well. So from start to end, that could be anywhere from 3 weeks up to 7. It really depends on the organization's ability to get that allow us to get that deployed in their organization. The actual reporting of it and writing of it is pretty quick. So probably about 3 to 7 weeks in total is typical. And the final engagement is more of a more heavy-duty consulting engagement, and typically the timing around that is anywhere between 3 to 4 months from start to end, from inception to the actual report out.
Great, and we do have a question from one of our attendees about pricing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, so the free assessment is the low price of free. The tier 2 is $10,000, which we think is a really great value. And then our pricing on the 6 consulting, the tier 3, is in the neighborhood of $50K with some variation in there depending on individual needs. But that's the pricing on each of those tiers. Okay,
great. Thank you. So, Matt, a question to you to maybe just drill down slightly on the maturity model. What went into this model so that you put a lot behind it, but what went into the creation of the science behind it? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so as we put it together, I mean, it kind of was created based on a few things. As Dave mentioned, we used some of the academic research that was in place already by a few academics that got into organizational design as kind of a baseline. But what we also tried to create in there was more of this, I guess, practical usage that we've seen, across the last 30 to 40 years of working with clients, and from those of us who have come from the client side, having built these models together, a better understanding of the dynamics of the organization that create this. So as a backdrop, one of the things that, we frequently ran into before is that, you take one of these maturity assessments from an organization and you kind of get this high-level understanding of where you are, and then a year later you take it again after you've done a whole year's worth of activities and you find out, gosh, I'm still in the same spot, and it kind of leaves you, kind of scratching your head a little bit. We had this one broken down into various levels of detail, as Dave kind of illustrated, so that you could see your progress not only at a global level for your organization, but so that you could also see what your progress was along each one of those individual dimensions of information and processes and people and culture and things like that. So as we put it together, we used part academic, and then we also used a lot of, kind of tested analytics that relate specifically to the dynamics in an organization, and tried to show that proof of the impact of each one of those measures within the report itself.
And you have a pretty big set of data behind the development of this model, right?
Yeah, we've got almost 5,000 responses on here, broken up globally. Some of the areas where we've got probably the higher levels of responses are North America, U.S. and Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, and Australia, and then I want to say nearly 80 countries in total, but those are the ones where we've got the highest level of responses.
Great, thank you. All right, to Michael, let's talk a little bit about what is the point of all this. Why not go out and buy, VOC systems, other products and services? Why invest in an engagement like this at the front end of an improvement initiative?
Yeah, Bob, it's, one of the things, the average program, people might be spending anywhere from, $100,000, $200,000 on the software, and then maybe as much on the services. for some of the giant programs we work with, many millions of dollars. And when you think about what you can learn from this as a fairly small investment with what I would say is a very, very large return, if you could take the results of this and you could even improve the impact of your CX programs by 20 or 30%, that would be a massive return on the investment. We think that the return can be even more than that. So we think it is a fairly small investment, and when you think about planning before you do, this is a great way to do that.
Okay. Well, let's talk about a couple of quick and maybe more tactical questions. Let's start with voice of customer. Could you define that briefly? Is it just about surveys, or are there other sorts of data that you advise clients to consider as they're thinking about the voice of customers?
Are you asking me, Bob, or?
To Michael, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, increasingly voice of customer is so much more, right? Because today we have so many different channels where customers can express themselves. They can express themselves through the surveys that we do, but they can also express themselves through social media. Increasingly, they have tools where they can just simply have some sort of simple response. Sometimes it could be, increasingly we're starting to see some things that measure emotion and other things with nonverbal. So there's all sorts of ways we can start to collect data about the customer, and we need to be able to bring those together. And when you bring it back to the CXEvolution framework, that's what the companies who are getting to the level of solve are starting to do, because they have so many different sources and they're starting to master it at that level.
Okay, great. Let's go to Matt. I want a question from one of our attendees about technology. What kind of, do you provide any tools or technology to your customers so they can adapt and manage these CX improvement initiatives on their own?
Yeah, so the kind of the baseline for what a lot of them do is what's called a enterprise feedback management system. So it's taking the feedback that you're getting from your voice of customer program and putting it into a format that your organization can digest it in a broad sense. So broad sense meaning that it's not just reports that come back into your research team or your customer experience team, but they come back in I guess a format that everywhere from your senior management to your front lines can see the information that they get, but they can also have it specific to their role or function. And that's one of the items that we found in the assessment that is probably one of the easier things to execute, because it doesn't require you to change the culture or anything like that, but has one of the greatest impacts. Everybody understands, how your organization is performing on a regular basis. Now, in addition to that, as it relates to the assessment itself, when the results come back, we have it created into an automated report, but we tend to deliver those in person because we want there to be a discussion around, what the results mean. And then, ultimately the most important thing is so how do we act on this? What do we do next? And that's our opportunity to be able to partner with you to be able to identify where your organization can move and how we might be able to help out, or at least provide you advice for what you need to do within your organization to take that to the next level.
Okay, thank you. And Dave, a couple of questions to you. One that's a bit more about technology, another one about management and leadership. First, on the technology side, do your engagements, and I suspect maybe the third of these options that you talked about, do they get into the technology issues, platform issues, like how are you going to, deliver mobile customer experience, or, survey technologies, whatever it might be, because there usually is a technology element in these programs, right? Dave, are you with us?
I'm mute. I'm there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So with technology is a huge part of it. What we do is we go in and we identify those areas of opportunity, like process is a great example. And from there, we do have technology solutions such as case management, and other predictive analytics such as Spotlight. But in many cases, we don't have the technology solution, and we'll partner with others to help provide that or advise on possible solutions to that. So it's kind of a combination of we do some of it, but where we don't, we'll be able to help our clients and advise them on where they might get that solution or solutions.
Okay, and sticking on that, the technology angle for just a moment here, there are models out there for digital maturity as well. Do you see the CX maturity and digital maturity kind of working together in some kind of lockstep, and they both need to kind of happen together, or what?
Well, I think, like I alluded to, technology is a means to an end. So having a digital maturity model is kind of interesting, but I think it's a bit narrow. What we're trying to do here is look at the organization as a whole. And, of course, digital is part of that, but that's just one small part of an overall ecosystem to improve your organization. So if you're just focusing narrowly on technology or digital, I think you're missing the boat in terms of how you impact the customer, because it's, as we talked about today, it's much, much broader than just the technology.
Right. So you wouldn't say start with digital, mature, and then kind of hope for the best. You'd go the other way, right? Start with the experience and then bring in digital and make those improvements where it's called for.
That's correct. Yeah, it's all about experiential design and working backwards from what the customer should experience or you'd like him or her to experience, and then everything kind of flows from there.
All right, we've got time for a couple more questions here. I do want to make sure we address the elephant in the room, and I'm not talking about Donald Trump, but leadership. It's something that I believe it was Matt that really stressed that, or maybe it was Michael. But in any case, it's clear from research that we've done and that you've done that without a strong leader, it's tough to really make these programs work. So, if you're dealing with a CX professional, might be a chief customer experience officer even. Dave, what advice do you have for them to get their leaders to really embrace this movement and really lead the company toward a better customer experience?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, there has to be some kind of latent understanding and latent belief of that. And so if someone just does not believe and is not going to be convinced of it, you might want to find another job because you're not going to be able to turn that ship. Now, there are many cases where we have sort of the uncommitted voter. They're on the fence. And in that case, things like linkage and showing them the relationship between the customer experience and important business outcomes. And I think more than anything is we're in a world where we need accountability. And the ability to show an ROI on a program is absolutely critical. And so those are some of the areas that we can also help with is making the case and helping drive that relationship and showing it very explicitly. And we found that going locally, so the further down you can get, the more specific you can get. So you can show a dealer it's good for them, or you can show a retail bank locally, that retail bank that this is good for them. That's really what gets you over the hump from measure to solve. Because now you're not having to use carrot and stick tactics. You're able to kind of show the relationship, and people start to understand, wow, by doing this, I'm going to make more money. So that would be my advice.
All right, and we're right at our stopping time. I want to just real quick, Matt, do you have anything to add to that? And could you also answer one other quick question from our audience? Are there differences by industry that you've picked up in your research?
Yeah, so as we looked across, I mean, we've got 20-some different industries that we can cut this down by, so you can get a good benchmark. We definitely see some differences by industry. There's some that tend to be a little bit more progressive, and some that tend to be more lagging, and you can probably guess those as you look across industries. Those that tend to have a very progressive view of the customer that you might see through product development and things like that. Versus those who tend to be a little bit more of a laggard with some of that sort of thing. So progressive being kind of your retail or your hospitality and stuff like that. The laggards being maybe more the institutional, the insurance and stuff like that. Although they're becoming pretty fast followers in their adoption of some of this stuff. The other thing, to kind of add on to a little bit of what Dave was saying as well, is that organizations are quickly understanding that we need to be customer-centric. So they're putting people in place for this sort of thing, saying, hey, you're in charge of our customer experience approach from now on. But what most organizations struggle with is they don't know what that is. They can quickly identify when they're seeing failure, but they don't know how to define that success. And the intent of the assessment is to be able to give them that roadmap for, hey, if I'm starting a customer experience program, or we've got a program in place right now, what should I be considering? And most organizations will start and frequently end with this idea, well, we should measure and report. An absolute cornerstone of any program includes that, but there's so much more in order for an organization to have a success. And this is really establishing what else should I be considering in our customer experience roadmap for the organization for that success.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dave, Matt, and Michael. We'll need to leave it there since we're at our stopping time. We didn't get to 100% of our questions, but we did make a note of them, and I'll send it over to our friends at MaritzCX and see if they can get back to you directly. So let's wrap up. Thank you all for attending. We had a great turnout today and a lot of interest in this very important topic. Thanks to our speakers for doing an excellent job, Dave Fish, Matt Inman, Michael Allenson. Pleasure working with you. And also big thanks to MaritzCX for sponsoring this program. So that's it for now. Have a great day, and we hope to see you another day for a Customer Think webinar. Take care.